In the beginning, the world breathed with a gentle rhythm, its heart beating in time with the seasons. Mornings dawned with a soft golden light that spilled across dew-kissed meadows, and evenings faded into violet twilights where fireflies danced like living stars. Rivers ran clear and singing over smooth stones, and forests stood as ancient cathedrals, their canopies filtering sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. Humanity lived in quiet harmony with this world, their days marked by simple labors, and their nights by shared stories beneath a blanket of constellations. There was a profound peace in the ordinary, the smell of fresh-turned earth, the warmth of bread just pulled from the hearth, the comfort of a neighbor's smile. But as the years turned, a subtle shadow began to creep across the land. Not with violence or noise, but with a slow, quiet corrosion of the spirit. It started in small ways, a withheld kindness, a seed of envy left to sprout, a truth gently bent for convenience. The shared stories around the evening fires grew less frequent, replaced by private worries and unspoken suspicions. Hearts, once open like windows to the sun, began to close one latch at a time. People turned inward, their gazes lowering from the majesty of the starlit sky to the dust at their own feet. The harmony that had once defined existence began to fray at the edges, the beautiful tapestry of community slowly unraveling thread by thread as a deep and quiet corruption took root in the silence between people. In that gathering shadow, one man remained a steady flame. Noah was a man of the soil, his hands calloused from tending the vine and his brow often damp with honest sweat. He lived a life of quiet rhythms, rising with the sun to work the land that had been in his family for generations. His home was a simple dwelling of stone and timber, nestled in a gentle valley where the light seemed to linger a little longer each evening. There he lived with his wife, a woman of quiet strength whose laughter was like the sound of a clear stream, and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, young men whose characters were being shaped by their father's unwavering example. While the world beyond his fields grew increasingly distant and cold, Noah's heart remained steadfast. He walked with a sense of purpose that did not come from the approval of others, but from a deeper, more constant companionship. His faithfulness was not loud or showy. It was in the way he cared for ailing livestock with the same tenderness he showed his family, in the fairness with which he traded his harvest, and in the prayers he offered each dusk under the vast, star-strewn sky. He noticed the suffering others chose to ignore, the widows overlooked, the children left untended, and in small, quiet ways, he offered comfort. His righteousness was a quiet melody in a world filling with discordant noise. Where others hoarded, he shared. Where others spoke in lies, he held to truth. Where hearts grew hard, his remained soft, a wellspring of compassion in a land slowly turning to stone. The darkness that crept over humanity did not touch his spirit. Instead, it seemed to make the light within him burn all the brighter, a solitary beacon of unwavering goodness in the deepening gloom. The voice did not come as thunder, nor did it shake the ground beneath Noah's feet. It arrived instead like a deep, resonant silence that filled the spaces between his thoughts, a presence both immense and intimately gentle. Noah was alone in his fields, the evening air cool against his skin, the first stars beginning to prick the darkening dome of the sky. He paused in his work, not out of fear, but from a profound sense of recognition, as if a part of himself he had always known was finally speaking. The sorrow that flowed into his awareness was not a human sorrow. It was vaster, deeper, an ocean of grief for a creation that had turned from its own beauty. It was the sorrow of a parent watching a beloved child willfully stray into darkness, of an artist seeing a masterpiece defaced. The voice conveyed no anger, only a heartbreaking weight of disappointment, a divine lament for the corruption that had seeped into every heart, for the violence that stained human hands, and for the silence that had grown where fellowship once thrived. The communication was a calm, solemn unveiling of truth. The world, in its current state, could not continue. The infection of wickedness had spread too far, its roots too deep. The harmony of creation was being choked by the very beings entrusted with its care. And so, a great cleansing was necessary. A flood would come, a deluge of waters from the heavens and from the deep places of the earth, to wash the world clean of its corruption. It would be a reset, a return to the primordial waters from which life first emerged, a terrible but necessary act of mercy for a creation gone astray. In the quiet of that field, under the watchful eyes of the emerging stars, Noah received this devastating truth not as a threat, but as a sacred trust. The immense grief of the divine was shared with him, and in that sharing, a purpose was born. He was chosen not for his strength, but for his steadfast heart, not for his power, but for his faithfulness. He was to be the keeper of the promise, the anchor point for a new beginning, and the solemn weight of that calling settled upon him as gently and as irrevocably as the night itself. Then, with the same calm clarity, the focus of the communication shifted from the sorrow of what must be washed away to the precise, hopeful details of what must be preserved. The immense, grieving presence now became that of a master architect, imparting a vision of salvation with methodical care. Into Noah's mind flowed not just words, but a complete and intricate blueprint, a divine schematic for a vessel of hope. The instructions were relayed with perfect precision, each dimension and material specified with an importance that resonated deep in Noah's soul. He was to make an ark of gopher wood, a sturdy, resilient timber that could endure. The vessel was to be a massive, rectangular, chest-like structure, a floating sanctuary. Its length was to be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. The numbers were not arbitrary. They held a divine proportion, a geometry of grace and stability meant to weather the coming chaos. Noah saw it in his mind's eye. The 3 decks, tiered like a layered cake, each with its purpose. There would be a window finished to a cubit above, a single source of light and air from the heavens, and a single door set in its side, the only entrance and exit, a threshold between the old world and the new. He was instructed to coat it inside and out with pitch, a black, viscous sealant to make it watertight, an essential barrier against the coming deluge. The purpose of this colossal undertaking was stated with equal clarity. This ark was to be a refuge. Into it, Noah was to bring his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives, 8 souls to carry the seed of humanity forward, and they would not be alone. Of every living thing, of all flesh, 2 of every sort were to be brought into the ark, male and female, to keep them alive. From the great lumbering beasts to the smallest creeping things, from the birds of the air to the creatures that moved on the ground. A complete representation of the earth's breath and life was to be gathered and sheltered within those pitched wooden walls. The instructions were a task of monumental importance, a sacred charge delivered not as a burden, but as a meticulously planned act of preservation. The care in the design was a testament to the value of every life it would carry. In that quiet field, Noah received not just a command, but a complete and perfect plan, a detailed map of mercy in the face of impending judgment. The weight of the calling was immense, but it was balanced by the absolute clarity of the path forward. He knew exactly what he must build. The first cut of the saw into the gopher wood was a quiet sound, a gentle rasp that seemed to hold the weight of the world within its humble tone. With the divine instructions etched into his mind as clearly as a craftsman's mark, Noah gathered his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and together they began the monumental task. There was no fanfare, no gathering of crowds to celebrate the commencement. Only the four of them, standing before the towering trees that would become their sanctuary, their faces set with a purpose that was both solemn and serene. The work settled into a rhythm as steady and reliable as the turning of the seasons. Mornings began with the sharp, clean scent of freshly cut timber, the air filled with the sounds of purposeful labor. The rasp of saws biting through wood became the melody of their days, accompanied by the solid, satisfying thud of mallets driving pegs into place, and the scrape of adzes smoothing rough beams into perfect, interlocking shapes. Noah's sons, under their father's quiet guidance, learned the sacred geometry of the design, their hands growing strong and sure as they fitted beam to beam, each joint a prayer, each plank a promise. They worked from dawn until the light failed, their movements synchronized by a shared, unspoken understanding. Under the sun's warm gaze, sweat glistened on their brows and soaked into the thirsty earth. As evening drew its purple veil across the sky, they would light lamps, and the work continued under a ceiling of emerging stars. The night air, cool and still, carried the sounds of their labor across the silent valley, the rhythmic sawing, the soft murmur of consultation, the crackle of the lamp flames. It was a peaceful labor, a constant, reassuring proof of progress against the looming uncertainty of the future. The growing skeleton of the ark, rising steadily against the horizon, was not a structure of fear, but one of profound and patient hope, built beam by beam under the patient eyes of the sun and the stars. Word of the strange construction traveled slowly, carried on the whispers of travelers and the idle chatter of traders. It began with a few solitary figures appearing on the ridges overlooking the valley, their silhouettes dark against the sky. They would stand for a time, watching the rhythmic work below, before melting back into the landscape. Soon their numbers grew. Small groups of men and women, and sometimes children, would make the journey from nearby settlements, drawn by a curiosity they could not name. They came not with malice, but with a kind of bewildered fascination, gathering at a respectful distance to watch the great wooden form take shape. They saw an old man and his 3 sons engaged in a task of impossible scale, their movements steady and purposeful amidst the rising skeleton of the ark. There was no haste in their work, only a deep, unwavering dedication that seemed to hum in the very air around them. Occasionally, Noah would pause, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and his gaze would meet theirs. He would offer a slow, patient nod, an invitation without pressure. Some of the braver onlookers would approach, their questions tentative. Noah would set down his tools and speak to them in his calm, measured voice. He spoke of the corruption they all felt in their bones, the quiet despair that had settled over the land. He spoke of a coming flood, a great cleansing ordained from on high, and of the ark as a vessel of mercy. His words were not those of a fanatic, but of a man stating simple, tragic facts. He held no condemnation in his tone, only a profound and gentle sadness, but his explanations found no purchase in their hearts. The concept was too vast, the reality too stark to comprehend. They would listen, their faces blank with incomprehension or creased with polite disbelief. Some would offer thin, pitying smiles before turning away. Others would murmur amongst themselves about the foolish old man building a ship where there was no water, a sad spectacle of a mind unhinged by years and solitude. There were no arguments, no raised voices of conflict. The scene was suffused with a quiet tragedy, the immense, patient truth held by one man, and the unbreachable wall of misunderstanding that surrounded him. They would eventually drift away, leaving Noah alone once more with his sons and his divine task. The sound of their departing footsteps, a soft counterpoint to the steady, sorrowful rhythm of the building. The final plank was fitted, the last seam sealed with dark, gleaming pitch. The ark stood complete, a vast and silent monument of wood rising from the peaceful valley, its sheer sides catching the late afternoon sun. The tools were laid aside, the years of labor finally at an end. Noah and his family stood back, their faces lifted to the immense structure, not with pride, but with a quiet awe at the completed vessel of their faith. A deep stillness settled over the land, a held breath before a new kind of work was to begin. Then, from the edges of the forest, a movement stirred. It was not a frantic stampede or a chaotic rush, but the beginning of a calm, orderly procession, as if the earth itself were exhaling its children. A pair of great elephants emerged first, their gray forms moving with a ponderous, dignified grace, their intelligent eyes calm and untroubled. They walked side by side, their massive feet making soft, deep impressions in the soil as they moved with unwavering purpose toward the waiting ark. Behind them, from every corner of the compass, more creatures came. Pairs of lions with sun-gold coats, their powerful strides silent and regal. Gentle giraffes, their long necks swaying like living treetops against the sky. Striped zebras and shaggy bison, sleek deer and bristly boars. They came not as predator and prey, but as fellow passengers in a shared destiny, all animosity forgotten, all fear laid aside. The air filled with the soft rustle of their movement, the pad of paws and hooves, the whisper of fur and feather against grass, a symphony of life drawn forward by an unseen unifying call. Smaller creatures wove between the legs of the larger ones, pairs of foxes with bushy tails, rabbits with twitching noses, hedgehogs curled and uncurled in their measured progress. From the skies, birds began to descend in quiet, circling flocks before alighting on the ground to continue their journey on foot. Eagles and sparrows, owls and doves, all moving in synchronized pairs toward the great wooden haven. It was a pageant of breathtaking diversity and profound peace, a river of life flowing gently and inexorably toward its source of salvation. 2 by 2. The steady stream of life continued, a living tapestry woven from fur, feather, and scale, each thread guided by an invisible hand toward the ark's open door. Noah and his family moved among them, not as masters, but as gentle stewards, their movements calm and reverent. They had prepared for this, building stalls and pens, laying down fresh straw, and stacking great quantities of fodder, grain, and fruit in the hold. The air inside the vast wooden structure was rich with the scent of clean wood, sweet hay, and the earthy musk of the animals themselves. Noah's sons guided the larger beasts, the patient elephants, the broad-shouldered oxen, to spacious enclosures on the lower deck, their low, rumbling breaths adding a bass note to the quiet symphony of the ark. The animals went willingly, their instincts soothed by the same divine compulsion that had drawn them here. Shem and Ham worked with a quiet efficiency, their hands gentle on the animals' flanks, ensuring each had room to lie down and ample feed within reach. On the middle decks, Noah's wife and daughters-in-law tended to the smaller creatures and the birds. They filled troughs with water and scattered seed, their soft voices a comforting murmur as they settled pairs of nesting doves into prepared roosts, and ensured the burrows for the rabbits and badgers were deep and warm. There was no panic, no struggle. A pair of wolves lay down peacefully beside a pair of lambs. A great cat curled to sleep, its purr a soft vibration, not far from where deer stood calmly chewing their cud. The ancient laws of the wild were suspended, replaced by a shared, sacred peace. Noah himself moved through the decks, his experienced eyes checking every detail. He ensured the water skins were full, and the ventilation from the window above allowed a fresh breeze to circulate. He watched as the last of the creatures, a pair of tortoises moving with ancient deliberation, were guided to their place. The great hold was now a microcosm of the world, a breathing, living archive of every kind, all resting comfortably, their needs met. The work was done. The door remained open, a final rectangle of fading daylight. But the ark was full. It was a haven of calm anticipation, a wooden world waiting patiently upon the solid, soon-to-be-changing earth. The last of the creatures had settled, their soft breaths and rustling movements the only sounds within the vast, wooden sanctuary. The open doorway framed a view of the quiet valley, the world outside still and waiting, under a sky beginning to bruise with the first hints of twilight. Noah stood there for a long moment, his family gathered behind him, his wife with her hand resting gently on his arm, his sons and their wives standing close, their faces solemn yet serene. They looked out not with fear, but with a final, quiet farewell to the earth they had known, the home that had grown deaf to the whispers of grace. Then, without a sound of hinge or timber, the great door began to move. It was not pushed by any human hand, nor drawn by any beast of burden. It moved as if the wood itself had remembered a divine intention, swinging slowly, inexorably inward. The light from the outside world narrowed to a thin golden line, and then to nothing. The final resonant thud of the door settling into its frame was not loud, but it was absolute, a sound that seemed to echo not in the air, but in the soul. It was the sound of a world sealed away, of an old story ended. God himself had shut them in. Inside, the silence was profound, but it was not the silence of a tomb. It was the deep, resonant quiet of a sanctuary, a place set apart. The only light filtered down from the single window high above, a soft, dusky glow that caught the dust motes dancing in the still air. The gentle sounds of the ark's inhabitants, the rustle of straw, the soft exhalation of a great beast, the coo of a dove, only served to deepen the sense of peace. It was a world of wood and breath, a place of safety carved out from the coming storm. Here in the dim, warm interior, there was only waiting and trust, and the profound quiet of being held. Outside, the world lay silent under a darkening sky, utterly unaware that its final hour had come. Inside, 8 souls and a living treasure waited, cradled in the palm of a promise. For a time, there was only the deep, resonant quiet of the sealed ark and the soft, living sounds of its inhabitants. Then came a new sound, faint at first, a gentle patter like 1,000 fingertips tapping lightly on the wooden roof above. It was the sound of rain, a soft and steady drizzle that fell not in anger, but with a kind of solemn purpose. The rhythm was soothing, a lullaby of falling water that whispered against the great vessel, each drop a note in a quiet, celestial melody. The drizzle did not cease. It grew steadier, stronger, until the individual taps merged into a continuous, hushed roar. The sound was all-encompassing, a blanket of white noise that wrapped the ark in a cocoon of falling water. Inside, the air grew cool and carried the clean petrichor scent of a world being washed. The animals remained calm, their instincts soothed by the same divine hand that had gathered them, their breathing slow and even in the dim light. Then a deeper tremor joined the symphony from above. A low subterranean groan shuddered through the very bones of the earth. A sound felt more than heard through the ark's massive hull. The fountains of the great deep were breaking open. From fissures in the ocean floor and from hidden aquifers deep within the rock, immense volumes of water surged upward to meet the deluge from the sky. The ark, which had rested so solidly on the earth, gave a gentle, almost hesitant lurch. It was not a violent motion, but the first, undeniable sensation of buoyancy, of release from the pull of the land. The vessel began to rock, a slow, rhythmic swaying that was strangely comforting. It was no longer a structure of wood resting on soil, but a ship upon the waters, answering the call of the rising flood. The sound of the rain on the roof was now the sound of the world dissolving, of boundaries between sea and sky blurring into one aqueous whole. Yet inside, there was only peace. The gentle rocking of the ark cradled its precious cargo, a world within a world, floating serenely on the face of the deep as the heavens wept and the earth gave up its ancient waters. It was not a scene of terror, but one of profound, watery grace, the closing of one chapter and the silent, drifting beginning of another. The rain ceased as softly as it had begun, the constant roar on the roof diminishing to a patter, then to isolated drips, and finally to a profound and watery silence. For 150 days, the ark had been their entire world, a wooden cradle adrift on an endless sea under a sky of unbroken cloud. Now, the relentless rocking began to gentle, the great vessel's motion changing from the swell of open waters to a slower, more tentative sway. A deep, grating shudder passed through the hull, a sound of timber meeting something immovable after its long flotation. The ark had come to rest. Its journey ended on the mountains of Ararat. The waters were receding. Inside, the change was felt rather than seen. The angle of the floor was different, no longer yielding to every wave but settled, firm. The single window high above no longer showed only the gray underbelly of the clouds. Now, glimpses of a brighter, clearer sky appeared, and sunlight, true and golden, spilled through the opening for the first time in months, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air like tiny, joyful spirits. The world outside was quiet, a silence deeper than any they had known, filled only with the drip of water and the occasional sigh of wind over the submerged peaks. Noah, patient and watchful, waited for many days, listening to the new silence. Then he went to a window and opened it, the first breach in their wooden world. The air that flowed in was cool and sharp, carrying the clean scent of water and stone. He chose a raven first, a bird of sturdy wing and clever eye, and sent it forth. It launched itself into the vastness with a powerful beat of its black wings, flying out over the endless waters, a solitary scout seeking any speck of land. It did not return, circling instead over the slowly emerging peaks, a sign that though the earth was not yet habitable, the world of air and rock was returning. After another span of days, measured by the slow turning of the light through the window, Noah sent out a dove, a creature of a gentler nature, one that would seek not just rock, but the softness of life. The dove flew out and was gone for a long time, its absence a quiet weight in the heart. But then, as the light began to fade, it returned, its wings beating wearily as it flew back through the window to settle in Noah's waiting hands. It had found no resting place for the sole of its foot. The world was still mostly water. Noah drew the dove back inside, a gesture of care, and the waiting continued, a patient, quiet hope held within the walls of the ark, a hope as fragile and persistent as the first light of dawn. 7 more days passed in the quiet rhythm of waiting, each sunrise a little brighter, each breath of air through the window a little drier. Noah again sent the dove forth, its white wings a flicker of hope against the vast, receding blue of the sky. This time the dove did not return at evening. Instead, as the sun began its descent, painting the few high clouds in shades of rose and gold, it came back, not with empty claws, but with something held tenderly in its beak, a freshly plucked olive leaf, vibrant green and glistening with life. It was a small thing, that leaf, but it spoke with the voice of 1,000 prophecies. It was the earth's first whisper after the long silence, a promise written in chlorophyll and grace. The dove had found not just land, but a world already healing, already reaching for the sun. Noah took the leaf with reverence, its waxy texture a tangible miracle against his work-worn fingers. He shared it with his family, and they passed it between them, a silent communion of awe. It was more than a plant. It was a covenant made visible, the first stitch in the green fabric of a new creation. They knew then that their long vigil was nearing its end. The world was ready for them. When Noah sent the dove out a final time, it did not return at all. Its absence was the final, blessed sign. Then, the voice that had first called Noah to build, that had shut them in, now spoke again within the quiet of the ark. It was a voice of gentle command, instructing them to go out from the ark, Noah and his wife, his sons and their wives, and every living thing that was with them. The time of shelter was over. The time of beginning had come. With careful, deliberate hands, they unsealed the great door that God had shut. It swung open to reveal a world washed clean, sparkling under a sun they had almost forgotten could be so brilliant. The air was sharp and incredibly pure, carrying the scent of wet stone, of clean earth, and of that distant, miraculous olive grove. They disembarked, their feet touching not mud, but firm, dry ground. The animals followed in a calm, orderly procession, the great beasts and the small, creeping things spilling out onto the fresh earth, each pair turning to seek its place in the renewed world, their instincts guiding them to repopulate the silent valleys and forests. In gratitude that welled up from the depths of his soul, Noah built an altar from clean stones and made an offering. And as the smoke of his thanksgiving rose into the pristine sky, the voice spoke again, not in instruction, but in promise. Never again would a flood be sent to destroy all flesh. Never again would the waters rise to cover the earth. The rhythm of seed time and harvest, of cold and heat, of summer and winter, of day and night, would not cease. It was an everlasting covenant, established not just with Noah and his descendants, but with every living creature that had emerged from the ark. And as a sign for all generations, as a seal upon this promise, God set his bow in the cloud. A magnificent arc of color bloomed against the retreating rain clouds, its bands of violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, a breathtaking bridge between heaven and earth. It was not a weapon of war, but a symbol of peace, a divine signature painted across the sky. Noah and his family looked upon it, their hearts filled with a serene and humble joy. They stood upon a world renewed, under the arch of a promise that would span all of time, blessed and ready to begin again.